Daryl? Can we start now? We'll wait for Daryl to join later. Huh? Because we are running short of time. Announcement of force করছে Daryl. Okay. Welcome to the sixth session. I believe it's the sixth session of BIGD's Conference on Digitalization and Service Delivery. This is a detour from that general trend. This is looking into use of technology in research methods, something, a new frontier that's opening up. NLP is what they call, the technocrat is on my right side, who is Professor Nabil. That's okay. Nabil is in computer science, works in natural process language. And on my left are more into the development economists, so on and so forth, more into empirical research, applying NPL into research methods, which is more looking into the speech part, whereas to my knowledge, Nabil mostly looks into the text part. Not so much into the speech part. And those of us who are less familiar with the subject, the little I could gather is again the science of speech is on one side, and what is done with the text. Those of you who come from economics background would know that you carry out all this probit to bit analysis, get into one set of data, estimate a function, apply that function into another set. I'm not undermining whatever you are doing. All I'm saying is to link up. That was the feeling that I first got when I looked into the work that the NPL people are doing. And I have requested Nabil to actually lay out the background and focusing on Bangla language, at least ending with Bangla language, the problems of Bangla language. The two other speakers, Daryl, my left, Decodis. Yes. She has been working with Decodis in collaboration with BRAC also, but mostly in Africa. Munshi Sulaiman has been long known to me and has been working in Africa as well, but huge data focusing on women. And I've requested both of them to actually focus on the NPL part rather than on the survey findings part. I mean, how you apply that method, what are the nuances, I mean, kind of challenges that you face, how you are trying to overcome those things. Both of them are more into the speech part. So I'll request Professor Nabil to start off the thing. I'll come in on with it, please.
morning. Thanks for having me. I'm going to get right into it. So the topic that I've chosen to present is the emergence of NLP foundation models and the challenges that they cause for Bangladesh. And they're going to be related to the Bangla NLP because we're talking about Bangladesh. But Bangladesh has certain interesting issues. My co-investigator is Mohammad Mamunur Rashid sir. He's an assistant. Yeah. So Mohammad Mamunur Rashid is an assistant professor at the Department of Bangla at Jahangirnagar University. He also happens to be the consultant for the government's enhancement for Bangla language in ICT project. So natural language processing, this is a very basic definition. The application of computational techniques. All right, so the application of computational techniques to the analysis and the synthesis of natural language and speech. So this is the first definition that came up from the Google search, and it is extremely applicable to what we need to talk about today. And the challenges that we're going to talk about are going to be about the analysis and the synthesis of natural language, because within the context of Bangladesh, natural language has a broad meaning. And if we can do it properly, and that's really the key term, if we can do it properly, then we can make digital services accessible to a large group of people suddenly that currently do not enjoy a good access. So there's a business impact. I'm sure people can look it up. A lot of us understand it. Just a small use case. The A2I, we had a discussion with the A2I where they have a hotline, 333. And if we can just put a good information retrieval system with a speech-based front end, then we can reduce the workload of our 333 operators by 20%. But it does require a good information retrieval system and a good speech front end. Most of the solutions use neural network-based solutions. These are deep learning solutions, popularly known. It's, as Sir said, it's a function that you're trying to estimate the parameters for. But the only difference is we try to cut out the feature engineering that used to happen in classical machine learning. Right now, we want our models to learn the features directly from the data. That's the only real basic difference. There's a huge amount of engineering difference, but theoretically, that's what makes deep learning special. Foundation models is a term coined by Stanford University in a paper last year. It's a very interesting paper. It's very large, but it talks about the fact, it addresses the fact that labeling data, you need to have human labeled data to train these models, but getting labeled data is expensive. So what we're looking for are models that can learn useful features from data that did not require human annotation. So we are trying to cut out some cost. And the point is that future models, this is what they're trying to predict, and it's probably in the trajectory. Future models will be trained on very large amounts of unlabeled data, the data that did not require human annotation. And then they will be fine-tuned on particular data sets, which are task-specific, and hopefully they'll work very well, which is, again, the trajectory of the machine learning process now. And these models, which will be trained on unlabeled data, large amounts of unlabeled data, are what we are trying to call foundation models. In terms of NLP, foundation models almost always look like this, multi-layered architectures, where each word is represented not only by the word itself, but in the context it appears. So a word appearing in one sentence will have a representation different from a word appearing in another sentence, in the same word appearing in another sentence, because the sentence is different. And it makes sense because the same word changes meaning depending on context. These models are very large, very, very large, huge. They require a ridiculously large amount of data, massive. They also require very specialized hardware to train on. Very, very specialized hardware, very, very expensive hardware. They need to be periodically updated. It can't be that you train it once and then you leave it. As soon as COVID-19 kicked in, we acquired a vocabulary, COVID-19. Now, unless we retrained our models, it'll approximate something, but it's not going to do a good job. It's expensive, right? And it needs to be updated periodically. And it requires fine-tuning for various tasks. So it's not enough to just train this massive model. You want to create a chatbot, you now need to fine-tune it for particular tasks within the chatbot. The chatbot is not one task, it's a pipeline of tasks. And for each task, you're gonna need to fine-tune it. Now the fine-tuning is an engineering process. The point is, for each of the fine-tuning tasks, you again need benchmark data sets. The basic NLP workflow looks like this. We start off by acquiring ridiculous amounts of data, very expensive hardware, get some practitioners, and then we train a foundation model. Someone's done it for us, great. Someone does it. If we don't have it, we train it ourselves. We get linguistic samples, we get people who understand the language, and we get annotations. Now, these are different levels of skills. There are some annotations that require professors of Bangla. Then there are other tasks that you and me, we can probably annotate. The last step is the easiest one. Okay, this one we have covered. If you have the foundation model and if you have the benchmarks, then we can come in and we can slowly start to make progress. Maybe we won't do it the first time, but we can slowly start to make progress. But without those two, nowadays the processes, 99% of NLP processes require the first two. And as it so happens in Bangladesh, we have a problem with the first two, right? So let's start off with the corpus related challenges. So the term corpus really now means a collection of large amounts of text that did not require human labeling. It's just text we acquired. And most of the time, when we talk about a corpus, we'd like to talk about how big it is. So on the left here, I have the dimensions of a language model. And on the right, I have the dimensions of a corpus. But let's start off with the corpus, because then the language model is probably going to make better sense. The size of the corpus, how big is it? It might be just big, but it may not have diverse text. Not good. I need to have a diverse amount of text. Is it available? Lots of companies build corpora. They don't publish it. It's not available for me to test or use. No good for most of us. Is it relevant to the task? If you want to train a language model for speech, then training it on written blog posts probably doesn't make a lot of sense. You need to have transcribed speech. Right? Once I have the corpus, then the language model comes in. So any language model can be trained on any corpus, but the language model itself is distinguishable by its capacity, the corpus or the corpora that you are using, the architecture you have, and the objective function. Now, these are technical things, but these are mostly understood. Although there's a lot of research going on here. So whatever we've done, we sort of understand, but we still have to make progress. The areas of concern are with the size and the diversity of the corpus, of the corpora that we're using for Bangla right now. So on the left, I have tables mentioning some names of language models. If the names don't make a lot of sense, they're just names. Right? In the second column is an estimate of the number of trainable parameters. It gives you an indication of their capacity to learn. It's not a very good indication, or it's not a very accurate indication, but it'll do for most conversations. And the third column of the left table is what I like to say data appetite. How much data do you need to train these language models effectively? Now, BERT, which came out back in 2018-19, was trained on about 16 gigabytes of text. 16 gigabytes of text, we can manage this, maybe. Distill BERT aimed to be a smaller version, 16 gigabytes still. GPT-2 jumped 10 times more text, 160 gigabytes. Now, I'll just mention it here. It's very hard to get 160 gigabytes of text for Bangla. Very, very difficult. Right? The government project, their target is 40 gigabytes, not even 60, 100. T5 was trained on 750 gigabytes. And the one that has caught the public imagination, the one that almost every vendor that every client that you'd like to go to talk to who wants an NLP solution, they'd be like, ooh, I want something like that. They don't probably know the name, but they've heard the news. And the news is about GPT-3. That's 170 billion parameters, right? And it's trained on 45 terabytes of data. So we're really playing around. In Bangladesh right now, we're playing around at the same level as what we were in 2019, or what English was in 2019. Okay. Very expensive to train. GPT-3, the estimates to train something like GPT-3 is about $10 million for one round of training. Okay, the others are easier, but GPT-3 is very expensive. Text diversity is hard, so I'm just gonna go through and make a very simple. So the Bangla language models that we do have, so there's some very good work coming out of the BUHCAC NLP group. There's good work that came out of Shahjalal. We at NSU try to do some work. But these models are trained on mainly text collected online, which means that as soon as you introduce text that has some real life people talking about it. So Facebook posts or comments made against some type of product, which has basic errors in spelling. These language models don't work very well because they've really been trained on very clean text. Also, I'd like to make the point that these language models are mostly working on Promito Bangla. So any type of Bangla that is not Promito Bangla, these models don't do very well. I'm not entirely sure how that works out for digital inclusion, right? But it is a problem. Getting data for that type of text, which is non-Promito Bangla text, very hard, very, very hard. Right? Even actually linguists don't know how to properly codify it. Benchmarks. English has a lot of benchmarks. It allows us to track progress per task. Bangla has 3. 2 of them are about OCR and sentiment analysis. The sentiment analysis one is very small. BanglaNLG is about natural language generation tasks, which are a higher level task. We have next to nothing. We have some, but next to nothing about basic tasks. Part of speech tagging the part of speech of a word. Very hard to find a benchmark. We try to find whether there's been collaborative work between industry, academia, and linguists. So CS and linguist departments and industry. In the last 3 years, we found 6 papers. Right? Now, I'm sure if we look a bit harder, I'm sure we can get 10 more. But that doesn't do anything. Current Best Initiative is the government's enhancement for Bangla language in ICT project. They're going to work on 15 plus components. And what's very, very good about them is they're not trying to just build solutions, they're trying to build data sets, benchmark data sets. And the most exciting one is the tree bank, which is going to have basic NLP tasks annotations. So a part of speech tagging, named entity recognition. What you need to know is if you want to build a good chatbot, you need to have named entity recognition. You need to have intent classification, but you need to have named entity recognition, right? And without that, you're not going to build a good chatbot. So we can talk all we want about building chatbots to do service delivery. We don't have the tools for it right now. And they're building a huge amount of resources, but still it's heavily biased towards Promito Bangla. That's not a bad thing. We need to start somewhere, right? And this is probably the place to start, but this should not be the end. I think a lot of people view this work to be, we are spending a lot of money, we're done, but not really, we are just beginning. And it's not really a lot of money. The entire project is worth less than $20 million. It takes $10 million to train one model, which is state of the art. And currently, it's a vendor-driven process. They do require that academia is involved, but it is mostly a vendor-driven process. That's good in a way because vendors are getting capacity. They're learning how to do ML, large-scale ML, which is good. And it's also sort of limited by the government's procurement process, which is not entirely machine learning friendly yet, but it's a work in progress, right? Conclusion, we have a lot of problems, and a lot of these problems cannot be solved by technologists. It does need to be solved by demand, whether industry is interested, whether the government's interested, whether other people are interested. And that's something that needs to be worked out. And we probably need to question whether we can afford this type of ML process ourselves. Is it really good for Bangladesh? And yeah, thanks for BIGT for supporting the work. Thank you.
Thank you. You saved 5 minutes actually. But that doesn't give you extra fives. I've been requested to, cut things short. Basically, there are a couple of questions while Daryl goes to speak. I will just raise those things for Nabil to consider later on. Obviously, you did mention about at the end regarding the purpose. And I've been wondering what is the future of language, something we talked about before. If you can come back later on to discuss that.
The third livelihood surveys. And I like to think about that as thank you for listening, because it meant that the respondents could just speak openly about what they were thinking in response to some of these questions. And so here are the questions that we asked and got open-ended answers. How did the respondents really feel about the government-imposed lockdown? What did respondents most need to recover from the lockdown? And did they feel hesitant about asking for relief? Because we were a little bit worried in these last two questions that maybe there was a drop in the middle class back into poverty. I'm just going to speak about the first question, and it's up here. But we also have not just what the respondents said, but how the enumerators asked. So I'm going to talk about a content result and a methodology, an enumerator result. Let me just briefly talk about how we use NLP to analyze what respondents were saying. Now what Nabil was using NLP in the context of looking at speech to text within Bangla. We're looking at a process further on down the line. Because we didn't have the type of thing that Nabil is talking about, we needed to transcribe and translate into English. So this is a further down the line. When I do this type of thing in Hindi or in Spanish or in English, we don't have to do that. We can code directly in Hindi or Spanish or what have you. And we have an automated generated process to generate that text. What a pleasure in Bangla. So I'm dying for these things to be created. So in NLP, what we do is we do two processes. We use topic modeling, and that gives us keywords. out of a response that's been transcribed. And for example, a keyword might be safety. And we just use Python to do this. But then what we find is we can't just get keywords, we need key phrases, because people talk about safety in different ways. So they could say something like the government, they must impose the lockdown for people's safety, but they could also say, they say it's for safety, but it's actually killing us. Two totally different meanings. And so we use something, a program called Meaning Cloud, and we do topic classification, and we find we need both in social sciences. Now I add a layer, Dakotas adds a layer, which is where we do work directly on the audio in Bangla, and we extract speech signals. Now, those speech signals might be the pitch, if somebody's voice is very high or very low, intensity, which is loudness, and then what we might call PDQ, which is liveliness, the pitch going up and down. And simple duration. And we find there's a whole to themselves. And this is what it means. We say somebody answered this question with a higher pitch than they answered the other questions, or their voice went up on this issue where it didn't on other issues. So if you say a language has a particularly high pitch, that's fine because we're normalizing according to every person. So what did we find? What did respondents say to this question about the lockdown? Well, the first thing that we did is we ran sentiment analysis. If you've heard of NLP, you'll hear of sentiment analysis. Now we ran our own code on this. What means positive, what means negative, and we ended up with this pie chart. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down this pie chart and tell you how we use either NLP or sociolinguistics to break apart the sentiment analysis, which is based on pretty specific words, pretty broad words. Neither is when people answer this question just by saying, they didn't answer the question. They just said, yeah, the shops are closed. Or I live under the decision. They didn't express an opinion. So a lot of people really didn't say anything about what this is about. But in positive responses, we found something really, really important. And this is where the sociolinguistics comes in. There are situations where people might say a lot about the positivity of lockdown. So we call this nuance positive. That's when people go on and they're descriptive and they really say why they feel that this was a positive move. And there's really very, very little that is negative. On the other hand, you get these unnuanced, generic, sort of I'm going to tell you what you think, I think you want to hear type of responses. Something like, no, they're doing it for the good of the people. Oh, it's good. It's often sort of a throwaway comment. It's not really positive. And we find that 3/4 of these positive statements are in that throwaway type of category. And this is where the speech signals are helpful. So speech signals are extracted using a special software called Pratt. This is, you can barely see, you can see faint lines, and this is the pitch variation. It's that PDQ. And you can see on the top, this is the generic positive. So it's only usually like about 2 seconds on average, and compared to the 11 seconds on the nuance positive. And you can see how this goes up and down and up and down, and people are really talking. They're really kind of getting into it. The short duration is just throwaway. That's the difference between the generic positive and the nuance positive. And that ends up being really important in our analysis. The other thing that came up is that we found that there was this strong negative, and that mattered. things where people were saying this additional type of language around people are dying or they have to. And we found that in both the negative category and in the both, when people said both negative and positive, we found the strong negative and not just negative and not just both. And so that mattered because it made the negative stronger negative, and that mattered. You can see in these speech signals that that was driven largely by people who identified as poor. And we came up with those because people would say I or me as opposed to they, those poor, I poor. And that identification was really important in the strong negative. So what these speech signals are saying is that the pitch was low, the intensity was low, and the PDQ was flat. So people were resigned in their response. And those speech signals are very definitive. Eek. Okay, and you can see that a lot of the people who determine themselves as poor, identify as poor, went into the both category. And you can see that the both looks a lot like the strong negative. So this is the punchline. If we look at how these enumerators coded this response, you end up with like a reasonably kind of okay picture. You know, 44% said the government decision was good. A small percentage said, well, it's good for health, but bad for livelihoods. And then there's this really ambiguous others. So what do we get from that? On general, good, right? If we look at the bottom, we'll see that only 11% were just unengaged. They were giving those toss away answers. They said good, they didn't really mean good. It's not like that 11%. Like they're serious, they mean good. But then half were negative, and of those, a quarter were really negative. So this overall picture ends up with quite a negative picture versus the positive. So that's the punchline on the content. I'm just going to run to the punchline on the enumerators. So you have enumerators talking, respondents talking, and then enumerators, then respondents. And we have some overlap where enumerators are interrupting. And then we have post-talk. In other words, somebody says something, the enumerator says something, it's that post-talk, and then talking them out. First of all, enumerators talked more than respondents. And they did that more as the survey went on. So if you imagine, you know, the job of an enumerator is pretty boring. And it's kind of rough. They need to keep up that energy level. Their energy level goes towards the end of the survey. And they're trying to prompt these respondents along. And then this is the percent that the enumerator talks for. Always more than 50%. These are the enumerators on the bottom. Then there's the talking over, where they were trying to nuance things. They were talking over the respondent. And that was across the respondents. What's interesting is this one, where you look at the post-talk, in other words, what the enumerator said after the respondent said something. Now you can have your usual, to try to get people to keep going. You know, that's normal. That's not contentful. When they say something, they actually say words that's usually priming or leading. A lot of that post-talk for a lot of the enumerators was that contentful. So you say it's good? Oh, well, that's what you mean? That type of thing. And it ended up being a lot more leading. Now, the point here is not really that these enumerators need to be trained better. Oh, they're bad enumerators. What we found is the different enumerators were bad in their own way. In other words, they were people. and people engage with people, and they influence people in their conversation. There's this subtle agency going on between an enumerator, who's usually more educated than the respondent. And that power struggle plays out in our surveys. And so in conclusion, I actually have a bit of a call to action, which is the technologies to study open-ended research not only allow us for more scale, it allows us to listen better, and it generates lots of data lots of data to make sure that we have better speech recognition capabilities in Bangla. Thank you.
Right on time. Thanks, Daryl. Munshi, it's all yours now.
Thank you, Sajjad Bhai. Well, I'll follow suit and not stand at the podium. While the slide is being put up, let me start with a little story that makes me fearful. I'm actually quite scared of going into this completely unknown territory of trying to use NLP in our research. And there's a little backstory to it, like where it comes from. Okay. So let me talk about that fear, where it comes from. It's a little story of something that happened about 7-8 years ago. I was in one of the conferences organized by one of the multilaterals, World Bank groups. They had very nice RCTs done. There were a few of those, policy briefs, 2 pages, really them. And they had a good idea of translating those from English to Bangla. And I picked up the Bangla ones. And as soon as I started to read, there was a finding something like this that says, adding job placement into intervention to training only arm did not cause any additional impact on employment. I understand that. And then I picked up the Bangla. I was confused for a second whether I have lost touch with Bangla language. It's a natural thing. And turned out someone had a brilliant idea, maybe in the last minute, to translate it in Bangla using Google Translation. And I remember the findings, so I was just testing it out when I was putting up these slides, like what does it look like? So I don't know, I see most of the audience all are sort of Bangla speakers, so see how the Bangla is. কেবল প্রশিক্ষণ বাহুতে চাকরির স্থান নির্ধারণের হস্তক্ষেপ যোগ করার ফলে কর্মসংস্থানে কোনো অতিরিক্ত প্রভাব পড়েনি. Right? That's how it read. Actually, it read worse. It was a lot more tongue twisting because it's a story of 7-8 years ago. Things have moved on. I hear more and more acronyms like from SMT to neural machine translation, etc., etc. So the fear is I'm going into an unknown territory, but am I making a mistake like this guy or lady, whoever, possibly guy? I don't think a woman would come up with such a goofy idea. But anyway, that's beside the point. So whether I'm doing that or not. So with that preamble, let me sort of say where I'm trying to use NLP. So it's a study on cash transfer in Uganda. And we have 4 treatment arms for interventions. We have cash transfer, mobile money, and in some of the cases, we tell their husbands that their wife or partner has got the money. In other cases, we don't. And we want to see the impact of this privacy on various outcomes. Obvious ones are use of cash, economic empowerment in terms of employment, decision-making, but we also want to go into this territory of intimate partner violence. And that's where NLP comes in. So when we're measuring intimate partner violence, there are standard modules, right? So there are DHS surveys, demographic health surveys. We just copy paste. There are little modification needed because you can find these modules for almost every country. So for Uganda, we had it. So this asks questions like this. Did your partner any of these horrendous things in the last 1 month? And the responses are, we coded, yes, no, refuse. I was curious about is, thanks to Daryl, is all these nuances saying no versus no, 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 no. Even sometimes going further, no, 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 he will get a beating too. Right? So that happens. So can we capture some of that? That's kind of the intention of going into NLP. So what we did, so it's a study on ongoing study, it's in progress. So we had a sort of data collection in between the sort of baseline and just before the cash transfer. So we did a survey again, and for a sample, just 20% of the sample, which is about 400 respondents, we collected additional data in addition to this standard DHS module. And that's where I realized that I was interested in that no, 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 but that doesn't actually work with NLP or speech signal. We need them to talk a little bit more. And we had to change the question, or we had to ask a new question, which is more open-ended. And we did something like, please tell us about the activities of your partner which have or could have hurt you physically, such as slapping, kicking, or more serious ways, etc. So give us your thoughts. So just to instigate a longer qualitative response that we can record and then analyze. And then, of course, being in the field of experimentation, we have the ideas and the obvious. So a few things come up. Like, do we ask it before we ask the DHS question or after? Like, since it's a pilot, why not just experiment that as well? It's easy. In the form, we can embed where we ask before or after. So that's a mini experiment within the experiment of this pilot. And already a first lesson before we did any data analysis, despite all of this sort of knowledge that was created through the BIGD work and training, actually we did a far smaller pilot just for data collection with a dozen respondents, so that we have the better recording, etc., less interruption. Despite all of that, we could actually use only 212 out of the 400 observation. So that already sort of affects my thinking of, statistical power. If I'm going to lose a lot of observations for whom I don't have this data, or it'll be coded as missing, would I have power to capture impact on IPV in this other indirect way, or sort of more innovative or less conventional way? But that's something we can figure out. This is just basic statistics of the survey data. So where after asking those standard questions, we find 27% said experiencing emotional violence, physical violence is about 10%, 9%, sexual violence is a little bit more, 11.5%. So the relevance of it will come in a minute, but let's see the NLP. And this is where I see Nabil Bhai nodding his head. He knows what it is. I don't. If you have questions, maybe we can get back to it. But intuitively, what I understood is all the text that we have collected and sort of we translated, we had to use English. That's another fact. And we're talking about NLP for Bangla, or language modeling for Bangla. In Uganda, it's a population of 35 million, where there are 50 plus languages spoken. So if we are struggling, I don't think they will ever have, at least not in the near future. So we had to sort of translate that, and all the hard work that has happened by one of my colleagues. I hope he's online, Alex. But the idea of this is basically to see, based on those token or the text, are we picking up different topics? And my interest is in to find the topic that are related to IPV. So we had 3 questions, and then we had this before-after variation. Simplistically, if you see the topics are sort of scattered, that means you're picking up different topics, so that is better than if you have overlaps. So asking about asking this open-ended question before gives a little bit better results. So this is for one question about emotional IPV. The next one is about physical IPV. Again, asking before the DHS question makes better, less overlap. Sexual IPV, it's the same. So it kind of puts me at a trade-off that will come in conclusion. But let's see the sentiment analysis. So just a sort of clarification. So all of this NLP analysis that has been done by a separate team who did not look at the other data sets. So it's kind of one way to sort of cross-validate the responses across these two types. So in the sentiment analysis, as Daryl explained, we kind of tried to do a bit. We are still learning, we're not expert on that. But we come up with positive, negative, and neutral. And positive means good words, love, peace, negative, beat, slap, etc. And then when we cross-tabulate this with their response to the IPV question, when they said they have experience, that 9% who said they have experienced physical violence, you see a lot more negative. So this gives me confidence that we are capturing something. Maybe the same way the translation was capturing something. Maybe both are imperfect in some ways, but we know the limitation of standard questions, but there is some strong correlation going here. So we can sort of cross-validate. So that's one lesson from there is we can, for these sensitive topics, we can use multiple ways of measurements. The last slide, or second last, is just to show how the responses varied based on this before and after. That again puts me in another trade-off in terms of deciding when to ask NLP vis-a-vis the DHS type questions. So what we see is, on the left side, we have response to the survey question, what percentage said they have experienced emotional, physical, or sexual violence based on whether they responded before NLP or after NLP question, the open-ended. So thankfully for physical and sexual violence, we don't see much of a difference, but for emotional, we see that if we ask them an open-ended question first, and then the standard question, they are far more likely to say that they have experience. Intuitively makes sense. I see people nodding head. Intuitively makes sense, but then kind of brings issues of comparability with the baseline, et cetera, et cetera. And on the right side, we see the sort of categorization based in the NLP, based on before, after. And there, again, there is a bit of difference, but mostly sort of going between neutral and negative. So there is more negative when we ask DHS, NLP after DHS. So just kind of a little summary stat that hopefully will help us to decide how we pick it. So the last slide, not to go over it, just to say, the next step for it is going to be trying to use the speech signal that Darren explained. We're not there yet, but before going there, you can see like the amount of volume, the volume of text. So both responses, these blue colored, these are both responses. You don't need to read it, but you can see the responses vary in how long, so how engaging the conversations are before we can do any speech signal analysis from there. So I guess there is a lot of unknown, but overall, it seems like a promising way for me to have a second measure of a very sensitive topic like IPV. So I feel like it's going to be an interesting use case of NLP in research. Thank you.
Thanks, Munshi. We are perfectly on time, actually. So the floor is now open. I'm not going to ask them to ask each other, because they would be asking quite relevant questions from where we can learn a lot. That'll be, next to the floor session. So anybody has a question for clarification or a precise question to ask, it is Ananda.
My question is to Naveed. You have mentioned about the expense of doing NLP. I'd like to ask you how to democratize the NLP for researchers in small institutions or so-called global south. in the context that we have experiences like open source movement in software and other areas. Even in e-commerce, we now are talking about ONDC, Open Network Digital Commerce. So how do you see the pathway to really make it available for researchers all around the world? Thank you.
We'll take the questions first before the speakers respond for the time.
Hi, I have two questions. One is for Professor Nabil. When you were talking about the investment for developing the NLP for Bangla, I was curious about once you invest that money, 10 million, 20 million, for the update and maintenance of it, is that also expensive? Is that an ongoing expense? What is the investment for that? Or what does it approximately look like? And I have another question for Daryl. When you said that the enumerators were, often prompt by, asking leading questions, and which I presume affects the negative responses versus the positive responses. So is there a way to adjust for that? Because even once the speech recognition software is in place, that would still affect the responses. So how can we adjust for that to sort of neutralize the question?
Any question? There was a second hand raised somewhere.
Thank you for the very interesting session. So my question is directed towards Dr. Collins and Dr. Sulaiman. So telephone surveys have a lot of benefits, like it's a lot more cheaper, and it's also it can also help us to do more time responsive research because it's a lot more faster. And I have also had the fortune to be involved in two of them, but it also has some limitations. And a lot of the time, the feedback we receive is that it's not verifiable what is being said because we are not seeing the expressions of the other person or their circumstances. So my question to both of you is that such sort of sentiment analysis that you're doing, where you're saying that some questions which came out as positive in the quantitative analysis is actually a lot less nuanced positive when we do the sentiment analysis. So these limitations of telephone survey, can this sort of new dimension of analysis help to mitigate some of those limitations for telephonic interviews, to be precise? Thank you.
I'll add few questions if there is no more question from the floor. First thing is regarding that $10 million question from Nabil. Is there any kind of social cooperation like you do with GitHub kind of activities where it's an open platform, whatever I'm posting out in the Facebook or somewhere automatically, there's an exchange which puts it into a platform and creates that corpus data? That's one question for you. And with Daryl and Munshi haven't gone into the Bangladesh case yet, but Daryl has been working on the Bangladesh part. So dealing with Bangla, specific challenges that you're facing. And the third question generally for the applicants as well as for Nabil, there's always that cutoff point where you choose between low or middle or between, like we do it in the probate analysis also. How do you choose that cutoff point? Is it PRED given, meaning the program given? And how far is the program neutral to languages and socioeconomic conditions?
So about the phone survey, I'm sure there could be ways to improving it. So, I mean, it's an unknown, so I wouldn't try to answer that, but that kind of reminds me of the limitation of the survey as well. Like you talked about seeing the expression. When we're doing survey, enumerators can see the expression, but do we capture that anyway? I mean, does the survey really have an advantage of seeing the expression and capturing it in any way? I don't think as much. So that's kind of one quick thought that came. Now about the sort of cutoff point. So I'm not sure. I mean, I have a clear answer to that either, but the analysis that I see, it seems like more in the line of how we do sort of wealth index, like principal component analysis, those to sort of divide tokens or text into different thing, clustering thing there. So that's like the wealth index. And then the challenge is like for wealth index, that's something we know that we use based on PCA, and we can interpret that this is wealth. But when it comes to NLP, deciding what is this component one, what is this component two, for me, it seems like there is still a lot of sort of assumption and guessing game. Like based on text, we can say, okay, this guy is possibly talking about, like I was reading about some books. So you can like, these ones seem to be about recipe book, these ones about tourism. Kind of, you can make some guesses, but on these types of social problems, I don't know we are advanced enough to decide on these topics that we're capturing, which one is what. But then once we kind of decide, I think still the sentiment analysis, this categorization, that's again kind of our subjective element to it. So yeah, in my use case, as long as we sort of do it independently with different teams and use it for triangulation, I think it still makes sense, but I'm sure there is going to be sort of massive improvement every day in this.
Okay, so let's see, let me address the neutralizing of the enumerator and the phone surveys at once. So the work that we did with BIGD is actually very strange. Usually, IVR. So we don't have a live enumerator, and we do that for several reasons. First of all, cost. I mean, you can push, and literally right now, I am pushing hundreds of surveys all at once, and people will answer those surveys within an hour. So, you know, we've done survey sizes of up to 500. We'll be doing survey sizes of up to 500, 600 here in Bangladesh in 2 different projects that I'll be doing with my colleagues at Microsave. So the scale capabilities is pretty awesome. And IVR is just somebody taking a button phone and talking and pushing numbers. There's no download of applications and that type of thing. The beauty of doing that is that not only can you have an avatar, you have an interviewer who is not only speaking the language, they're speaking the dialect, and you get a matched gender. Women will speak to women if we think that works best. If age matters, we'll have an older woman talk to older women. So what you end up with is people feeling like they're talking to themselves. And we find that there's an outpouring of talk. And so actually removing the social bias of having even somebody on the other side of the phone is the way that we deal with that. We get more of the truth, and people just talk for as long as they want. You don't get the facial expressions, which can have benefits and negatives. But the reason why we use not just the NLP, but the sociolinguistics is to get that extra layer. And I find that that matters. Oftentimes we'll use the NLP to get what people say, and we'll think one thing, and then we'll put on the sociolinguistics and realize that somebody said something very optimistic in this very flat way, and we'll get a little shaken. We say, oh, wait a minute, that's not positive. That's, I don't know.
someone came and asked a linguist a question, how many dialects exist in Bangladesh for Bangla? There is no clear answer. So that pre-study is missing. So the democratic, we don't know who to get to first. And this is not a negative part. It's just that we need to do that to get to the next part, which is the second part is actually, so that's the democratization of data, let's say. The second part is going to be the infrastructure. Unfortunately, it's still cost-driven. It is so expensive that no one is going to give it for free to researchers, particularly researchers within Bangladesh, because let's face it, our NLP is nascent and our market size is not big enough for the big companies to come in and say that there's a big enough market size. So if we do great in NLP Bangla, we're going to make billions of dollars. Right? We'd have to do it for the betterment of our people. And this is where it's not going to happen. I actually don't see it happening just by, raising interest in the big corporations. I think the government policymakers definitely have a part to play. That it must be first done for the betterment of the people, then eventually it would make money. That's my feeling. The infrastructure cost question is actually a very insightful question. Unfortunately, the cost of retraining these models is, so retraining procedure, and I'm gonna, with the danger of getting a bit technical, we are still exploring methods of what we call incremental learning, which is we train a model to a certain stage, and then we get new data in, and then we retrain it just on that little bit, but not lose knowledge of the previous information. That is still not our most reliable method of retraining. Our most reliable method of retraining still is get all the data, retrain from scratch, right? Which is still expensive. But there's an added cost of running a process that is gathering data, because a lot of the time it's easy to just crowdsource stuff and get bad data. So you still need some type of human in the loop to cut out, which adds expense. Sir's question about the $10 million and the corpus and whether there's a way of centralizing this. One of the big issues that we still find uncertainty within the Bangladeshi NLP community is the issue of copyright. Can I create a corpus by copying an Instagram comment and release it to someone else? Can I, for example, take a news broadcast, transcribe it, and release it for the public? What's the copyright status? Am I liable to be sued? Unfortunately, answers for these are not clear, particularly for the big social media, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. The answers, what is the copyright issue for a research-related publication of Twitter data is unclear. At least I have not had a very clear legal opinion given to me yet, and I've asked multiple people. So unless we start to solve those problems, it becomes harder to gather this data. The point is, most people are not going to come to a new platform just to give data. We have to get the data from the existing platforms. So there are challenges. And again, as I said, some of these challenges are technical, but a lot of these are not technical. A lot of these challenges are social science related. Thanks.